Hi guys, Scott here from Outlaw Garage. Today you are joining us at Jaunt. It's a local manufacturer converting historic classic cars to electric. So we're here with Dave, just over there in the corner. We're going to take a big tour today of the amazing work that they're doing here, bringing electricity to your classic car.
Hi, I'm Dave. I work here at Jaunt and we take old classic cars and make them electric. So that's things like Minis behind me, lots of Land Rovers that you'll see, and now a bunch of other cars as well, Volkswagens. We're working on some rear-wheel drive stuff, including a Corvette that's over there. So really trying to work through and engineer whole systems so that we can work towards a really high quality system. And you can either do that by spending forever on one car, or work on a system that you can install consistently over multiple. So as much, small scale production, sure, but trying to do that the best that we can, and do that to a level of engineering that you'd expect for when you buy a car in 2024. I think the best way, then, we have probably a car in every stage. We might jump around models, but it doesn't really matter, models and variants and types. So I think some good examples, if we start back here, here's one that's come to us complete, and behind it one that's halfway through. So bit of a split between whether we're sourcing the donor vehicle for the customer or they've had it in their lives previously. So sometimes it's like, oh, this is the car from my grandparents' farm. More commonly, we're helping source the donor vehicle. And what we do in that case is work with the customer wherever they are in the country to find the right vehicle. They'll purchase it at that point, less stamp duty, of course, on a cheap old vehicle, and then we're providing the mechanical services on top of that. So we do complete restorations ground up for the Land Rover range. We don't do that for other vehicles. We've got thousands of parts and bills of materials for Land Rovers, so we do complete rebuilds on those, but we can also work with ones that have been restored somewhere else. So this is an example of a car that was restored by someone else up in New South Wales, bought by the customer post that restoration, and most of that hard work can be kept. There's a few things that we need to change through electrification. This is an early one, so that means a little bit more to change. We'll come back to what we do in the chassis, but we'll go this way first, because this is probably a good example of something else that comes to us, of a car that's been owned for nearly 14 years. I think this is 2010. This customer bought this car new. It's been used on their farm for all kinds of Land Rover things. You can see the dirt and the water level coming up to here.
It's been used. It's
been used, and you can see all the all the stuff inside the interior. It's all full of mud and water and dust and all the kind of good things. Minimal wasps' nests. If the cars are older than 30 years, there's always a wasp's nest. First thing, this one actually had a cracked head. So one of these Puma diesel engines, they're pretty reliable, but this has been sitting for a couple of years with a blown up engine. So it comes to us. First thing we do is pull out the motor, the transmission, the transfer case that you can see on the ground there, and then with these Puma vehicles, sometimes they're like this. So this is again 2010 vehicle. Sometimes that means it's in great condition and we're just doing a conversion. But in this case, this is going to have a full colour change, new interior. It's going to be sort of rebirthed. But we keep a lot of the components. With the series, there's a lot more new stuff. So series Land Rovers being anything from the late 50s through the mid 80s, we replace a lot. As they get newer, we can obviously keep a lot more things because they're in a lot better condition. So in this case, the next step is we keep a lot of the existing wiring loom. There's nothing wrong with 10-year-old wiring. We patch into this. There's of course a lot of sensors and things that went to the internal combustion engine that we don't need. Work with the existing power steering unit. We can keep the axles and the suspension. There'll probably be some upgrades to this one. But what we're doing is making space for a battery box that goes here. So we have our sort of main battery box for the Land Rovers sits here. All the electrical junction sits on top, and I can show you in more detail. We'll jump into the electrical room and have a look at some of that. So that's our core 55 kilowatt hour battery, about 320 kilos that sits there. Then there's the option that most people getting a Defender and a 110 like this, the long wheelbase, will upgrade to double that size, so 110 kilowatt hours.
Okay.
Which makes it, one of the biggest batteries of any EV in Australia. But of course, you're dealing with one of the worst, the worst wind resistance and the least aerodynamic vehicle of any EV in Australia too. So that 110 kilowatt hours probably good for up to 500 kilometres of range. Again, speeds over 80 k's an hour. That's the downfall of any Land Rover, any car really. But we're working against that wind resistance off-road even more, like incredible range off-road. And I'll show you how we're running that. So this is just in mid pull apart. So the next phase after that all gets pulled apart is to then, depending on the vehicle, it might go down to a kind of bare chassis and be rebuilt from that. So here and here, even though that's not too pretty with the sawhorses on it, is two examples of actually finished chassis. And although that is all rusty, that's the intention. So this car is being kept as a patina build. So it will have the original sort of 1950s panel work untouched, kept. The customer went to a collection of Land Rovers, a place called Land Rover Heaven, in sort of southern New South Wales, where they have hundreds of Land Rovers, and chose the car based on the panel work. But keeping that panel work means we want to keep the chassis. So while we've made adaptations for the battery boxes and the motor, we've had this outside rusting, getting a nice surface rust, so that all our additions to the chassis kind of match. So that chassis is about to go into rebuild and have axles and everything put on it, to then turn into something like this. So again, this is something that was pretty beaten up, then it's been sandblasted, it's been recoated, and then had all the additions for the motor and batteries added to it. So you can see we've got a jig for where the electric motor will go, and that's, well, there's two of them right there. So what we're putting into the Land Rovers is that's a Tesla Model 3 motor. That would usually sit across the rear axle on a Model 3, have a 9-to-1 reduction gear in it and drive each wheel. So those are stripped apart, rebuilt with a 4.5-to-1 reduction gear instead, and a torque biasing diff, so basically like an LSD in it.
Okay.
So that it then drives the front and rear prop shafts.
Yep. So
it's rotated 90 degrees, dropped in the centre there. So then we get the whole, we replace the entire engine, transmission, gearbox with that. Drops in there, those are up to, depending on the variant, up to about 350 kilowatts, and off the top of my head I forget the newton meters, a lot more than this car ever had, enough to be able to work with just that single reduction gear. And so that means, yes, we're removing a transfer case, which means no high range, low range split, but the level of torque delivery is equivalent to about low range second. And if you've driven one of these, low range second is very, very low. Yeah. And of course, you've got all the torque from almost 0 RPM. We roll it in a little bit, but it's a very capable off-road vehicle, even without all that reduction gearing. Then that goes into axles that have been completely rebuilt. So new diff ratios. So the series Land Rovers came with about a 4.5-to-1 diff, which was great when you wanted to use them as a tractor in a field in England, but not so great when you wanted to do 100 k's an hour. So they've got a 3.5-to-1 diff, the same as the later Defenders and Discoveries. Then a much upgraded axle, drive flanges, all those things, including a disc brake system. This is the collaboration we've done with Design Development Engineering in the UK. So it's a brand new hub that we have machined here that supports the disc brake, supports the the hanger and all these kinds of things. So there's Defender calipers and brake pads. Then we do discs on the rear as well. And so you don't actually, the good thing about the EVs is you've got all this regen. So you have improved brake performance anyway. We found that while we could make the car pass all the requirements with original drum brakes, it just didn't feel right. And I'd say that in the proviso that every classic Land Rover fan would be like, well, it feels right, it feels like it should. Yeah, but it doesn't. When you make the throttle work a lot better, you kind of need to make the brake feel better too. So for
it's
us,
about go and stop, isn't it?
it's about go and stop and steer, and it's also about so many of our customers are people who've never thought they could own a classic car because they weren't mechanically minded. They're not able to adjust their brake drums regularly or fix the engine or whatever. But it's also about, you want to have a car that's fun and you can throw the keys to your friend and they can drive it and not feel awkward and feel afraid. Like, honestly, if you get into, for most people, their first drive in an original series Land Rover like this is quite terrifying because it doesn't work the way a normal car does.
Yeah.
And so for most people, feeling drum brakes and where you can feel it in each wheel, that feels like broken brakes. So we do an electric brake booster into, a boosted system into discs. It stops not like a modern car because there's still travel and there's still, it's an old-fashioned four-wheel drive, but it stops reliably and quickly, and it's just a lot more approachable, I guess. And that includes, we do electric power steering and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
One reason we also do discs on the rear is that we can fit an electric park brake. So when we've lost the transfer case, Land Rover's had a drum park brake here. You could also get a disc option. They had a park brake on the end of the transfer case. We don't have a transfer case, so we've got to use a park brake in some other way. And so we use an electric park brake, like almost every EV literally every EV on the market, and a lot of other modern cars, and of course, and Land Rovers for 25 years as well. So it's a little caliper that clamps on the back, sticks in on and off. It doesn't need power to stay in its on state, and it also allows us to have a park functionality that then automatically locks on the calipers. You can also turn that on and off manually because you might want to do you might want to do a handbrake start in some way, but we can support all things like hill hold and all of those kinds of things with the electric brake booster that we do. So you can see a lot of the other little mods that we do. You can see, front battery supports, obviously the motor supports that we've welded in. With other cars, we make a point sometimes of, hey, we're not drilling any holes, not welding anything on, it's fully reversible. And I guess the idea of the EV conversion being reversible is almost just code for we're not screwing with it and we're not screwing with the originality. I don't think many people who've ever had an EV conversion have gone backwards. Still a lot of expense and labour, right?
Yeah.
But I think that for series Land Rovers, every one of these chassis that's ever come to us has needed repairs, has already been modified in some way. Holden engine conversions were such a huge thing.
Yeah.
And so every series Land Rover has had some modification or needs modification or repair in any way. So for us here in Australia, we've got qualified welders, we can document the welds, they can be happily certified. So welding in is safer, easier, faster, better for what we're doing. And if you really did want to go back, cut them off, that's fine. And also with, say, Defenders, it's a lot easier because in these days they just had holes just where they needed them. By the time you get to a Defender from the mid-2000s, the chassis is full of holes where they, every time they changed engine type over 70 years, they just added more holes to the chassis. So there's plenty more places to bolt things on as the vehicles got younger, newer, older, the model line got older. That's the chassis for the patina build. This is the body for the patina build. Again, in roughly vehicle order, but you can see this amazing, the way this original acrylic wore was so different to a sort of a modern two-pack where you use the clear coat and stuff. This has been rubbed by who knows what, a tree in a field, I'm not sure, a sheep, but down to almost a polished original Burma Bright.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
So super straight, like incredibly straight, but also incredibly worn.
Yeah, because it's got a shine on it, hasn't it?
Yeah. Had to do some repairs to the bulkhead. It's the one steel component, really. The Land Rover's got the steel chassis, steel bulkhead. That's the structure of the car. Everything else is those aluminium panels.
Yeah.
These always have a bit of rust, and so that's been the repair work has started on that, and then we'll start to age those panels as well. But these will be, the interior will be covered in floor mats and things as well, so we won't see it. So yeah, front guards as well. They'll be all cleaned up, and then we're probably going to seal it with a matte coating so that it so because there is steel fasteners and different things that we don't want to go even further. But yeah, it's a pretty amazing level of wear.
Yeah.
So then I talked about that front battery box and newer Defenders getting kind of restored as well. This is also a 2010, and this came to us as a silver vehicle, done a couple of 100,000 kilometres over in WA. Was bought, the intention originally wasn't to actually do a colour change, but by the time you get through the process and we're pulling bits apart to do some repair and we're soundproofing, and then paint work is still expensive, but it becomes, we're sort of halfway there with the disassembly and everything.
Yeah, you've done part of the job already, haven't you?
The heritage colour is lovely. These were the original, but these were the side steps and rock sliders that came with it, that were originally powder coated.
Oh, okay.
So we've galvanised them to keep that heritage theme, because we've got the gal bumper, and we'll have some galvanised and nickel highlights as well, zinc highlights on some other things. This is a mock-up, empty mock-up of the battery box that we're talking about. And so batteries up to here, and then all electronics, and I can show you inside the electrics over in the other room, but basically all the junctioning, all the control systems, battery management, charge management, all of that in here. Well, you can see on these bits of tape, motor output, DC charge input, communications, accessory systems out the side there. So AC, heater, all those kinds of other things, charger, and then there's coolant manifolds on the bottom, and so these are all liquid cooled. There's big aluminium cold plates running down the core of this.
Okay.
So cooling the batteries and thermal management, I guess, is a big thing, particularly with charging. So if you consider that if you want fast charging, and people want up to, with the small battery pack, that's up to 70 kilowatt charging. We can double that when you double the size of the battery pack. But if you consider that maybe is, say, 100 kilowatts for 30 minutes, that's like putting your foot down and requesting 100 kilowatts of power for 30 minutes. It's hardcore acceleration in terms of energy transfer for that duration. So in normal driving, you might be requesting 200 kilowatts out of the engine momentarily for a few seconds, but then you're back to coasting and you're pulling almost no energy. So the big thermal stress, heat transfer, energy transfer of the batteries is charging. So that's why we've got to have cooling, and we've got to have proper thermal management for that cooling. The batteries they don't want to be too cold, but they also need to be kept from being too hot during that charge process. So combined, that level of cooling is about the same size radiator as you'd have in an internal combustion car, because the motor sort of sits at peak 80 degrees kind of thing.
Yep.
What you find though is that it's not electric cars, it's the design trend to have no visible radiator. Electric cars all have radiators. They're just not needing to be right in the front of the car because they're not so hot. They'll often have them, and you've got the flexibility from a design perspective of not having an engine block. So say a Tesla Model 3, it's got a big radiator that's sort of sitting at that angle rather than upright. Yeah. And it, you can definitely hear fans and you can hear all kinds of things, but it's managing coolant and thermal management is different. And it's, again, particularly when it's charging, is when it needs to be often most active, which is so different because there's no point in putting it right at the front of the grille. There's no airflow when you're parked. And
when you're parked, yeah.
So, a bunch of other cars here, from cars about to go into conversion.
The Camel.
And be put apart. The Camel.
Aptly named.
Camel, named partly from inspiration from the original Land Rover Camel Trophy, and partly because that has 4 fuel tanks.
Oh.
Yeah. So this was a support for the Shitbox Rally, and a bunch of other things. It's done a lot of cool stuff. This car though, we did an evaluation assessment on it, and it's sort of a mid 70s series. It's had a hard life. It's done a lot of things. It's still driving, but it needs a lot of work. And the current owner of this car, loved the history and loved the look of it and all these kinds of things. But the work that we've got to do to convert this one it's hard to justify that expense.
It's a lot
for what you want out of it. So he's actually bought a newer Land Rover in the same body style, which means we don't have to do
All
a
the work.
ridiculous amount of just repairs to get it back to a good starting point. So this is for sale. If anyone's interested, it's an awesome car. This is, at first glance, I love the Land Rovers that have been used for something. And actually this car, definitely when you get into the details, it's had a life that is hard to determine. That's branding from what we assume is an Australian tourism commercial.
Yep.
But it's got mods that are very custom. It's got these ex-military light guards. It's got some different suspension. It's got evidence that it was used for something a bit more. I don't think it was a UN vehicle, according to as that sticker says. This too was going to maintain its patina. So we're not going to repaint it. We are going to re-galvanise some areas. We're going to fix up the interior, but it will basically look exactly as it does now, just a little bit neater when it's electrified. People see, new battery tech announcements all the time, and that's sort of research announcements, not in production.
Yeah.
But what we can see if we look on the timescale of 10, 15 years, we can. It's a bit cheaper. We've maybe saved 20% in volume. It is a steady, whether it's going up or down or whatever, better density, cheaper cost is a steady thing. It's not going to be that there's a magic, thing that turns on in terms of getting batteries available and in production, but we're getting there. And then in the middle of that, battery prices went up during COVID and are now back to where they were before that, and all these kinds of things. The level of energy that we can fit into most of the vehicles we build now is at a point where conversions make sense, in that I think in Australia there's a 300 kilometres of range is the point where you can put aside that anxiety. And I think there's all the research shows that once you buy an electric car, that range anxiety kind of goes away because you realise you're charging at home all the time and you don't worry about public charging infrastructure that much. With conversions, it's always been about getting enough in, and to me 300 kilometres, particularly with a classic that you love, it allows you to be in Melbourne or Sydney, drive for an hour to wherever you're going with your car club or your friends, drive to a small country town, drive around for a day, come home and not have to charge. Now, the reality is you probably will charge because it means you'll get a premium parking spot and there's free charging from the local council or whatever, but it means you don't have to. So this has been running the whole time we've been talking. So that's one of the features, is that's the sound of an idling 1962 Land Rover. It's a 1958 Corvette. I am learning about Corvettes doing this. I've been open with the customer that, the 50s era of American vehicles it's not my aesthetic, but you can appreciate a lot of what they've done. I think it was what a pretty amazing time in automotive, where you're like, everybody was rich and they could make a new model every year and change the lights every year and everyone would upgrade their cars, and like what a interesting time in the world.
And it's the styling that goes into these, because nowadays manufacturers are not doing these things because of the cost of it.
A hand-built mold, this is almost the whole car is a single piece of fiberglass. And if that's your process, you can change it every year. You can change the taillight design every year because you're changing the mold and it's still a hand-built thing. It's really interesting to compare like an agricultural British vehicle with a sort of a American sports car of basically the same vintage.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's like, this has magical technology, and then you get further in and you're like, oh yeah, it was the 50s. Look at the way they've done that. So we can do some cool things. This is where the exhaust came out. You can see it on that side. These will become indicators. Unlike America at the time, you flash the tail light, the brake light. We'll make those indicators. This had a right-hand drive conversion 30 odd years ago or something, so we haven't done that. So it's really well done. It's clear that they made it as a sort of symmetrical thing in the first place. But yeah, you have this fiberglass shell over what is in the first generation Corvettes, a ladder frame chassis, so similar to the Land Rovers in a way. Ladder frame, solid axle rear, independent front suspension. We can drop a battery pack here, so we're going to be putting 55 kilowatt hours of battery here, and that'll get this car 300 kilometers plus. We're talking about loving these old cars and loving the feeling, the design, the drivability of those. How do we make sure that we're not destroying that, I guess. So this is an interesting one with the Corvette, because that's a solid axle. Later they went to independent rear suspension. There's been a lot of people will convert rear-wheel drive cars, classic cars, by putting a whole, say, Tesla rear end with its whole suspension geometry, and they'll weld that in or create new bracketry. That, of course, changes the car. You're converting it to an independent rear suspension. It will still feel like the old car in many ways, but for us, there's an opportunity. You've got this big transmission tunnel. Let's fill it with motor and transmission. So this is a 200 kilowatt motor that will be what powers that Corvette. This is a 3-speed clutch pack transmission designed for EVs, designed for actually heavier, larger vehicles. So a 3-to-1, a 2-to-1, and a 1-to-1 reduction. This, we're scanning and measuring to see if that could fit, because what that would give us would be a super high efficiency gear, so you get more range, and it would also give you a kind of at 3-to-1, that would be a ridiculous off-the-line gear. This won't quite fit in that transmission tunnel, so we'll move to a single reduction gear that'll be significantly smaller, just a single reduction, maybe 1.9 to 1 kind of thing.
Okay.
And that'll do, this motor spins to 12,000, this'll RPM, this'll do everything that needs to do with a single reduction gear. So that can all fit into the transmission tunnel.
Yeah.
Driving an uprated prop shaft, and you can put a stronger rear diff in, stronger axles and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it'll fundamentally still feel exactly like that car, just with a different powertrain. So we've been dancing around this Volkswagen. This is built by another workshop, BM Classics, over in Laverton.
Yep.
And so when we used to be over in Williamstown, they did a lot of our paintwork. Kevin did.
Okay. Yep.
And he also does some pretty amazing custom builds does a lot of Volkswagen work, but does also some V8 conversions of classic
trucks. And we've done a couple of videos with him, because
cool.
he's got a lovely old Beetle.
Yes.
We've done a few videos with him because we don't see him that often, but we've done a few.
Yeah, and also just cool stuff like Land Cruiser frames with a V8 engine with a classic American truck, just whatever, but looks beautiful. And so he's built this vehicle with, and really this is it's an original Kombi officially, but it's built from crate parts, basically. The bodywork is from crate.
Yeah, because I see it has upgraded brakes.
And then what you see is these wheels, and these wheels are this size.
They are gorgeous.
Because this is supporting much, much upgraded brakes. And these wheels, the front was, it's got a whole BMW front end, the independent suspension at the front is quite amazing. But they're that size because then they match the rear end, which is a Tesla rear end. So this has a Tesla small drive unit inside. That is a little tricky to see. I've probably got some light. You can see
look at that.
underneath. So that's that's the subwoofer.
That's
but it looks cool too. But if you get underneath, you can see the Tesla drive unit.
Oh yeah.
So that's the small drive unit, they'd call it. In the Model S's, you'd either get, if you got the rear wheel drive, you get a big motor at the back. If you got the mid spec, you'd get a small front and small rear motor. And if you got the crazy spec, you get the big rear motor. This is the small rear motor, but small means still 200 kilowatts, which is plenty in a classic Volkswagen, and they fit really well. So 200 kilowatts peak for a few seconds, and then constant forever of like 40 kilowatts sort of thing. Electric motors have a sort of linear sort of derating of power that they can hold. So it's 200 kilowatts for 5 seconds, and then 180 kilowatts for another 5. And
okay.
But of course, when you're accelerating and you're at 100 within 5 seconds, well, what do you need the power for?
Yeah.
What this means though is we can keep, by having the motor down there, we can give it a boot.
It looks remarkably functional.
Which is very, very functional. And so this was a big thing for this customer, was having there'll be a panel there hiding that suspension.
Yeah.
And so this will be a closed-in lockable boot. The batteries will be under the vehicle. So Volkswagens have, it's not a body on frame, but underneath you've got those kind of chassis rails kind of things. And they're so high. With the battery modules we use, we can configure those to fit in and up and around.
Okay.
We probably lose about that much ground clearance, like 20 mil, and have a bash plate on there, so all the weight can be low, central. So basically, you
can keep these at a relatively kind of stockish height, or even just lower them a little bit.
This is lower. This looks lower as well because it's got the bigger wheels.
Yeah.
So we're going to probably adjust it and bring it up a bit. I think practically, I think the customer just wants it a little bit higher.
Yeah. It is handy in Melbourne because of the speed bumps and.
It's got a 200 kilowatt motor, but it's not about being performance. It's just that's a good, efficient motor to use. So the same amount of batteries as in that front battery box in the Land Rovers will be disassembled and underneath. Okay. Yeah. While this is a very custom Kombi in a lot of ways, it's the first of what will be our standardised Volkswagen Kombi platform. So we've got a bunch more Kombis coming up after this one. Mini is a true kind of bolt-in system. So this is the kit that was developed by the team in the Felton team in the UK. We've done all the simulation to make it meet Australian standards. We do, on top of that, we do new 12-volt looms and other things, and we're doing the aircon system that will roll into the global system as well. But the key thing is subframe that drops in where the original subframe was. So if you're here last week, you would have seen all the original stuff on a crate. This is brand new subframe, modified to support electric motor, single reduction gear. That's the inverter. So it takes there's a battery pack that is somewhere around. Oh, right there.
There we go.
Yeah, under that blue wrapper. So there's a battery pack that drops in here. That's the front battery pack. That's the main output into positive and negative, and then into the three-phase that runs the motor. And you can see this sort of squeezes in around the Mini system. We always do a boosted brake system and stuff. Yep. Tiny little radiator to cool the motor and to cool the charger. And it's tiny. Tiny. So the good thing is we spend more time cleaning up. So this is a 1990s Mini. There was a lot of work in terms of... And it's a Cooper? Everything was a Cooper in Japan. Everything got a Cooper badge. Oh, doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything? No, Mini Cooper was just the brand. Like they do now, right? With new Minis, everything's a Cooper. Yeah. So a lot of work just, patching rust and putting soundproofing on and painting things. There's a lot of that. Upgrading suspension, we take the moment to do new steering rack, all these things. It's like $150 for a steering rack, and you can put that in while everything's out. So upgraded brakes and suspension, and by upgraded it doesn't mean like crazy race spec, because you're not using a lot of you're using a lot of regen. So you need to sort of get the right braking system for an EV. This has had all soundproofing put all throughout the floor pan. So there's still noise, of course, in an EV. There's the noise of the motor and the gearbox, but it's also just that because it's so much quieter, you hear all the road noise, all the little bits of water flicking up and all that thing. So actually adding that soundproofing helps a lot, because you don't have this background noise always there. And then in the rear, you've got so there's a rear battery box, so about a third of the battery goes in the rear. The key with the Mini system is, the opposite of the Land Rover, where we're cutting and welding and doing everything. This bolts up to all original points all the time. So you can see this battery pack picks up the rear subframe points and then the seatbelt mount points at the other side. And so that's all sitting on those components. Oh, so it is literally a plug and play. Literally plug and play. Everything is terminated. And so this is the system that, while we're installing and developing a few extra features, this is something that we are starting to, it's already happening in the UK, and it's starting to happen here, where we're shipping this to other Mini specialists to build. This is, we're optimizing the instructions, and obviously we're here for the support as well. But this is like, if you're already building great Minis, this is something that's very, very an easy step into a pro level, reliable, warranted conversion. So battery pack here on its little lifting sling. So bulk of the modules here, but this is the key with this is now the Mini is actually the same weight. In fact, maybe 20 kilos lighter than stock. So that handling, that Mini feel it's a Mini, but with an instant throttle response. Well, we hope you enjoyed the video and a bit of a look into the amazing work that's happening here in Melbourne, and especially with these electric cars and converting classics into a reliable daily driver. So please give the video a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We will put all the links in the description below for you to be able to see all the work that Jaunt are doing. Thank you very much. We'll see you later, guys. Bye.